Right, and thank you, Laura, for that tech overview that is always so welcomed and needed. I just wanted to say a special thank you to our federal project officers, Rashonda Shoulders and Bob Lindekamp, as well as our Center for Tribes leadership, Nancy Lucero and Kathy Deserle. And I really wanted to give a personal thank you to all of you for being here today. It's not easy to make time for conversations about wellness and building our own personal and professional resilience, especially in times of extreme crisis and loss like the one we're currently experiencing as a result of COVID-19. So thank you for being here. I also wanted to acknowledge that I'm coming to you, as well as Lisa, from Missoula, Montana. And I just wanted to acknowledge that we're in the Aboriginal territories of the Salish and Kalispel people, and just to honor the pathway they have shown us in taking care of this place for generations to come. And many of you I see are here on the call today in the chat box. So thank you. We're talking about secondary traumatic stress today. You'll often hear us throughout this presentation refer to it as STS, as well as strategies to maintain wellness, because across the happenings at the Capacity Building Center for Tribes, we continually hear and express needs for it, whether that's through requests for training, or if it comes up in peer groups, or people are seeking resources on the Tribal Information Exchange. There's a resounding message from the field that this conversation around secondary trauma and how do we maintain our own wellness for ourselves, for us as professional beings, and then also for our organizations, that need is there. We also feel like you all as tribal child welfare professionals are at such increased risk for exposure to secondary traumatic stress that it's really imperative we get you this information so that you have what you need to be able to respond to it. So before we go any further, I was going to turn it over to my colleague, Lisa, who's going to open us for the day.
Thank you, Laura. I know that prayer, or like opening virtually, is a new concept, but I am holding a sema or tobacco in my hand, and I'm just going to do a short prayer. Sagama manadu, sagama koi indigo jabwemo, migizi nadodem, mashki zibing nadun jaba. Creator, I ask for health and healing today for our communities and our workers. We are in unprecedented times, and we are unable to connect a lot with our families, our communities, and many of us have worries of the health and safety of those that we are connected to. I ask for health and safety and security for all. Miigwech, misayu. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you, Lisa. My name is Laura Guay. I am coming to you from Missoula, Montana with the National Native Children's Trauma Center as part of the Capacity Building Center for Tribes. And a little bit about my background. My career has been in child welfare in the state of Montana as a direct caseworker, providing supervision, and eventually doing some workforce development for all the incoming staff within the division. And then my transition over to the trauma center has really looked like coming alongside and supporting tribes who are working on building resilient systems, building trauma-informed systems that are across all child serving systems, and also providing some technical support around adapting assessment tools, screening tools, and curricula to best reflect the values and cultures of the tribes requesting services. So that's a little bit about me. And Lisa?
My name is Lisa. I am from the Bad River Band of Lake Superior Chippewa Indians in northern Wisconsin, but I'm currently living and residing in Missoula, Montana. I have a background in tribal child welfare, so I have been both a caseworker and a supervisor, and I have worked for 2 different tribes, my own and the Lakota tribe in Hayward, Wisconsin. And in both capacities, I also served as the ICWA representative. I am currently also co-teaching classes at the University of Montana with a colleague of mine, and currently work with the National Native Children Trauma Center. And I am happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Before we move into this presentation, I was just hoping that some of you, all of you, would be willing to either in the chat box or using the Q&A function, whichever seems simplest to you, to message into us a little bit about why you're here today, what compelled you to be here, what you're hoping to walk away from this webinar with. So we'll take a couple of minutes just to see what all comes in, and our hope is that we can adapt as we go to make sure, if we haven't already included those things, that we cover them for you. So why are you here on this? Why are you taking the time today to be here on this webinar? Okay, so some are coming in. I'm going to paraphrase for a few of you, and if you all wouldn't mind selecting 2, all panelists and attendees, that way your colleagues who are also on the call across the country today can see it as well. So some of you are saying learn some coping skills to handle secondary traumatic stress. Connected to a number of networks of tribal social workers and looking for ways to support them. Someone's working in youth prevention and hoping to gain insight and some universal strategies. Yes, STS definitely exists. It's without a pandemic going on. That's certainly something that can exacerbate it, but it has long since existed. Okay, so I think it's important to work and make sure that STS is handled in ways that seek support from other ICWA workers and other communities. Learn how to serve children and families better. Learn just more about secondary trauma and not how to take it home from you. Absolutely. Take it home with you. To feel some connections with others. Excellent. I hope that you get some of that today. Okay. Someone said, for further education, I've not seen this addressed often, and we hear that frequently, right? For something so pervasive in the field of child welfare, it's not something that there's often space for and time dedicated to talk about. Okay, I appreciate you guys putting those forth. And we hope that as we go through today, that you all will gain some of the information and the connection that you're seeking. So here's an overview of where we're going today. We really feel like there are 3 strategies to prevent secondary traumatic stress from impacting your personal life, your professional skills, and the organization's functioning and service delivery, and that these same 3 stages are also effective at mitigating and then building resilience to fight against those impacts. We're going to start by building some knowledge around what secondary traumatic stress is and what symptoms can look like, how they might manifest. We're going to talk about some recognition tools. How do we know when we're personally being impacted? How do we know when our professional skills are being impacted? And how do we know when our organization's service delivery is affected as a result of some of these symptoms? And then, of course, we're going to spend some time talking about strategies that can prevent secondary traumatic stress symptoms or alleviate them if they're already present. And I just wanted to remind you guys, use that chat box, use that Q&A area to let us know any questions that are coming up. And of course, we'll have time at the end for questions as well. So this first stage we're going to look at is knowledge building. And really, the more information we have, the more power we have to make decisions, to address challenges, and to create pathways towards well-being that really support not only ourselves personally, but our colleagues and the children and families and communities you all are serving on a daily basis. So I am going to launch a poll here. And it asks, how confident are you in your understanding of what secondary traumatic stress is and those common symptoms that are associated with it? We'll see those answers flying in for those of you who are on your computers and able to see the poll. So just your knowledge around what it is. Give a couple minutes here to let those answers come in. Okay. Couple more seconds here. There's still a few trickling in. Okay. Share the results with you all. I hope you can see that. So it looks like the most frequently reported answer is somewhat confident, right? So not quite confident in what it is or what some of those symptoms look like, but information you've heard along the way, or maybe you've researched a bit on your own. So we hope that we'll kind of move this poll a little bit towards more confident by the end of the day, and that kind of gives us a good sense of how to frame the presentation today. So I appreciate that. Stop that. So here are two different definitions of secondary traumatic stress. It is different from primary exposure to trauma, where we perceive our own safety and well-being to be threatened, or we perceive the safety and well-being of our own relatives and loved ones to be threatened. It's what happens to us as the result of chronic exposure to the pain and suffering of others, like the kids, like the youth, like the caregivers and kin that you work with on a daily basis. I did also want to highlight that you can, in your role, as you probably know, experience primary trauma in the workplace, right? So it's not unheard of for caseworkers to be threatened by clients with some backing to that threat. So when we talk about secondary traumatic stress, we're not talking about primary exposure. We're talking about those impacts that happen as a result of bearing witness to the trauma of others. And so why do we talk about STS? Why does it matter that as tribal child welfare professionals, you all attend trainings on how to combat the effects of STS? Working in child protection just places you at an increased risk for symptoms because of the very nature of the work. It's a trauma field, right? And what we know about STS is it can have profound effects on our personal well-being. So it can impact our relationships with our family and our friends. It can impact our beliefs and value systems. It can impact our health and change our overall way that we exist in the world. Professionally, secondary traumatic stress impacts a person's ability to learn new information and perfect the skills and the services that they deliver. And it often leads to turnover, and that turnover can lead to a field that lacks experience, which impacts ultimately the organization's ability to provide really quality services. You can't compartmentalize STS and its impacts, right? It's not something an individual that only an individual is responsible for, just like it's not only something that an organization is responsible for. So we often say the individual has a responsibility and the organization has an obligation to identify, address, and provide avenues for support to staff who are at risk to being impacted by secondary trauma. So there are some specific instances that expose you all to the trauma of others. This list certainly is not exhaustive, but we hope it provides a sense of when and how exposure can occur. So it can happen when a child discloses the abuse that's happened to them during an interview that you're conducting or witnessing. It can also occur when you're reading police reports that are graphic, or reviewing case files when a case is being assigned to you or during a case transfer. Listening to testimony in court can be a risk, can be an exposure opportunity as people replay the traumas that they've been exposed to, both kids and caregivers. It can happen when we talk to colleagues and they share the details of their own caseloads. And we're going to provide some strategies a little later about how to ensure when we're debriefing with colleagues that it's safe for everybody and productive. And then I think these last two will resonate with almost all of you out there doing the work. We are exposed to secondary traumatic stress when we replay in our heads over and over the decisions that we made, like whether or not a child is safe where they were placed. For a child who's just returned home, will they be safe? For the caregivers that you've been providing support to, will they relapse or return to an abusive partner? These worries, while they demonstrate our empathy for others and the passion that exists for helping, they can quickly permeate our own well-being if we don't balance it with taking care of ourselves in a really radical way. I just wanted to ask quickly, any other forms of exposure that you all feel weren't on this list, or ways that you feel that you've been exposed to secondary traumatic stress out there in the field? Give you a second if you want to chat box it in.
And Laura, there was one question that came in the Q&A pod, if you want to take a look at that while folks are responding.
Yes. All right, so we had a question. Is it exacerbated for Native people who work in these positions? I think of the collective trauma and the ways we are connected to the clients we work with. Yeah, I think absolutely. Lisa's going to talk about how, one, race in general and targeted identities play a role in risk for secondary traumatic stress. But I think you also, Esther, mentioned the connectedness of tribal communities, which we'll talk about here in just a couple slides, of how can it really be secondary exposure when you know, they're families that you grew up with and have known for generations, that they're that your colleague just did a removal, and that person, that family that's being directly impacted by that is connected to you. They're your family, they're your extended network. So I think that that's a really good point that we'll continue talking about today. Yeah, so we got a couple other chat box coming in. Childhood experiences, absolutely. One of the things that places a person at increased risk for experiencing symptoms of secondary trauma is their own personal history of trauma. Oh, after attending court hearings when the state's not practicing ICWA, traumatic when society is not practicing justice, right? So just watching over and over again, cases go in directions that might not be lawful, or certainly not culturally appropriate, and damaging to the tribe is an excellent example of opportunity for exposure. Nice segue, right? So what about secondary traumatic stress in Indian country specifically? So there are very few studies that look at the impact of secondary trauma among American Indian and Alaska Native populations. And the ones that do exist, it's impossible to generalize their findings to all Indigenous people. But what we do highlight here is the information that came out of the Attorney General's Advisory Committee of American Indian and Alaska Native Children Exposed to Violence that was published back in 2014. And it described the number of youth who were being directly impacted by violence within their homes and their families. And then the violence they experienced, like witnessing it within the community and watching racism play out towards them and their relatives. And one of the key stakeholders that participated in this process said, and his quotes up here, for us, the question is not who has been exposed to violence, it's who hasn't been exposed to violence. So we know that the rates of violence are higher for American Indian and Alaska Native children than any other race. So because of that increased prevalence, it's more likely that those supporting youth in tribal communities are being exposed to the frequent trauma to others. And then back to the question that was asked earlier in the Q&A, it's so unique for people from the community working in their own communities. And this concept of secondary exposure is really one to grapple with and critically think through, because what does that look like when it is your relatives? What does it look like when they might be parents now that you're working with, but they used to be your classmates in elementary, middle school, and high school. They're people that you know their stories and what they've experienced. I think that positions tribal child welfare workers who are working in their communities in a position to do some incredible empathetic and life-changing work, but also is quite the exposure to experiencing some of these symptoms of STS. But I think with symptoms come strategies to mitigate and prevent. And it's not just all on the individual, right? That there are things programs can do to provide support to staff, and there are things organizations can do to look at how they can support the whole system, the entire community. So as we talk about STS, what it is and ways that you all as tribal child welfare workers and professionals might be exposed, I think the concept makes some logical sense, right? That working in a trauma-related field, the potential that could take its toll just makes some sense, right? But beyond the common sense, I did want to highlight some of the science that's behind symptoms manifesting as a result of this exposure. And I hope this slide looks familiar for those who attended our first webinar on the impacts of trauma. We did that with some intentionality to show that the body's response to secondary trauma can mimic that of primary trauma exposure. So when triggered, a person will go into flight, fight, freeze mode in an effort to preserve their physical and psychological safety. And without a focus and intention towards our holistic well-being, a person experiencing high levels of STS can develop symptoms that mimic post-traumatic stress disorder. So as though the trauma had occurred to them themselves. And this is often because they were re-experiencing the stories that they've heard. They're replaying images of hurt children in their minds, perseverating on threatening interactions with clients that they've had. You might be on the balls of your feet constantly, whether you're on the clock or not. So constantly surveilling your surroundings as you walk to your car, as you walk into your house, when you're out in public with your kids. And a person might also become avoidant of people and places that provoke that fight, flight, freeze response within themselves. And I think we can all really relate to that intrusive thoughts component and not being able to control our thinking about the families that we work with and the decisions that await us in the morning when we are back on the clock. Okay. So re-experiencing avoidance and hyperarousal lead to some potentially devastating symptoms personally, professionally, and organizationally. And when we're thinking of ways STS impacts us personally, we often break it down into some of these key areas of our well-being. There are physical effects. That's the impact to our overall physical health, right? So it might look like disrupted sleep, weight gain or weight loss, being exhausted all the time, no matter how much sleep you get, having digestive issues or stomach problems, headaches, having a weakened immune system so that you're sick more often and that the sicknesses you get last longer and have more intense symptoms connected to them. There are emotional effects. So this has to do with our ability to experience and tolerate a range of emotions. So examples can be like being quicker to anger, or harsh emotions like frustration and irritability or annoyance. And it can look like the development of clinical mental health conditions like anxiety or depression. And it can also look like becoming extremely cynical about the system, about the world that we exist in, about the families that we serve. And I think oftentimes we try to soften that cynicism with kind of that dark humor, that sarcastic humor that many of us can relate to. It can look like quick fluctuations, calm 1 minute to enrage the next, and then struggling to bring ourselves back to that a certain level of calm. And it can also look like avoiding emotions, so numbing out, and in an attempt to avoid some of that sadness and disappointment that can come with this work. But problematically, when we numb out, not do we protect ourselves from some of those unwanted feelings? Sure, but we also aren't able to selectively only numb those feelings. We often miss the joy that can come from this work, the hope that is often inspired by the families that we're working with, and just kind of that renewed sense of positivity. And then there are behavioral effects as a result of secondary traumatic stress. And some of the common symptoms are changes in how we behave and act. Oftentimes you're looking for a shift in a way of being across these various domains, but it looks frequently like some maladaptive coping skills to, like substance use, to try to numb out that fight, flight, freeze response, or at least dull it. That a person might be experiencing who has high levels of secondary traumatic stress. Can look like letting go of the activities that bring us happiness, that bring us together, and just not wanting or feeling able to participate in those anymore, and just a general reduction in our ability to regulate. There are spiritual impacts, and this really is the impact to our souls. So do we believe in the way we used to believe, whether that's a higher power or the values that we hold? Have we shifted our belief system in that people are generally good and that things happen for a reason? Have we stopped participating in ceremony or traditional practices that used to be routine? Have we stopped seeking guidance from our higher power or our traditional belief systems? Some of the cognitive impacts we might see, that's our way of thinking. So it's a reduction in our ability to exercise that front part of our brain, the executive functioning component. So problem solving, critical thinking, impulse control are a few of those. I think that planning ahead, I think that that's one that I always resonated with during my time in direct practice. It was like I could keep track of upcoming court cases. I could keep track of what reports were due. I knew visitation schedules. I knew who needed to be providing drug tests on what day. I would forget my own doctor's appointments, and I couldn't make a plan for dinner in the evening. And I think that you see sometimes a prioritization that our brains will do for what it's placing as most critical, which is often the life and death situations that our families find themselves in versus ourselves. So then there's relational impacts. Are we still engaged with the friends and family like we used to be? Has there been an impact to the quality of those relationships? Do we still seek support from people like we used to? And do we still provide support to people like we used to? So that was a lot of symptoms, right? I think I'm hoping some of them resonated with you. I'm going to kick off a poll. Now, we're usually impacted across the board, but I think when we reflect, sometimes there are areas of our lives where we feel more impacted, whether that's our relational impacts, our connections to others have really shifted, or perhaps it's our physical well-being, where we are noticing that we're sick all the time. We are noticing that chronic fatigue. So I'm going to launch a poll here, I believe. And I would just like you guys to, if you're willing, identify the areas that you feel personally most impacted by the trauma work you all do. I'm going to poke my head over here to the Q&A box. Okay, so lots of answers coming in. A couple questions I wanted to respond to. Someone asked, for those that have or are experiencing avoidance or numbness, is there a way to come out of it? We're going to talk a lot about strategies. There absolutely is. I mean, I think there are times where you have to make decisions that are best for your health and your family. But there are certainly well-researched, well-established practices that can support us checking in with ourselves, understanding our emotions and responding to them, so that we don't get stuck in cycles of avoiding or reacting either way. And then someone asked, is there an increase in susceptibility to STS due to the times that we're in, political struggles, racial tensions, and COVID? We're going to talk about those specifically in a couple slides here as well. All right, so thank you guys for participating in that poll. I'm going to share the results with you all. So a lot of you, it seems like there's impact all over, and I think that makes a lot of sense, right? We're holistic people, so it's pretty infrequent that we'd find ourselves really only struggling in one area. So I can appreciate the spread that we're seeing there. But it looks like the highest rated was that emotional regulation piece, right, which is so critical to our ability to be okay ourselves, to be able to come alongside others and provide support and the services that we ultimately want to deliver. So we'll talk about some key strategies to support our own emotional well-being as well. Cognitive, those thinking distortions we might have. And when we talk about that from the perspective of child welfare, think about how important it is that we're able to critically think, that we're able to problem solve and see 3 steps ahead when that's possible. So when our cognitive functioning is impacted by this work, we have an ethical obligation to make sure we're doing what we can about it, and that our organizations are doing what they can about it, so that people can make the best decisions for the families that they're working with around placement, around visitation, around progress on whatever the reason was that the child might have come out of their home, or that the families required intervention in the first place. Right. Okay. I'm gonna move on here. Thank you all for participating in that. I think it's really important to message here that being impacted by the work is not weakness, right? It is a very normal response to the intensity of what you all are doing. It's human to be impacted. And when the work doesn't impact us, that's when we should be a little bit more concerned, right? When we're numb, we can't feel that empathy that drives so many of us to the work in the first place. So I think it's just really important to recognize that if you're experiencing some symptoms, if that resonated with you, if you were like, uh-oh, that's me, uh-oh, I know my colleagues are going through that, know that that is a very normal bodily reaction, brain reaction to what you all are experiencing on a regular basis. And we're going to provide you some strategies to support yourselves. So, in addition to the stress we might experience in our everyday lives, when there's not a pandemic occurring, the current public health crisis is likely exacerbating or adding significant stress in our lives and the lives of those close to us. So, the Center for Disease Control has said that stress during an infectious disease outbreak can lead to or include fear and worry about your personal health or the health of loved ones, right? We're likely all experiencing that right now. And parallel to us, the families that you all are providing services to are also feeling that. Having changes in sleep or eating patterns, difficulty concentrating, and of course, worsening physical and mental health conditions. So we just say that to highlight that the unprecedented times that we are in are contributing to the experience of secondary traumatic stress that professionals might be experiencing. And they're also contributing to the stress levels of the children, the youth, the caregivers, the other professional providers that are all connected to your work. Also wanted to say that these are times of just really immeasurable loss and grief, whether it's the loss of life or loss of our ways of we were existing in the world. I think it's impacted so much, it's hard to even put words to it, right? It's grandparents not seeing grandbabies, it's kids not getting the mentoring that they were through their teachers, through their coaches, through the connections they had within the communities. It's people not having access to the support that did fuel them, that did provide them some strength in spite of some of their exposure to secondary traumatic stress. So is it that sweats are being shut down, or people are making choices not to attend to reduce their risk of exposure to COVID-19? Is it celebrations that are not happening or are being delayed as a result to try to reduce the spread? So I just think it can't be understated the impact that COVID-19 is having on everyone's experience across the board, whether it's us professionally, whether it's the families we're working with, or the providers who we partner with, and our systems in general, the stress that takes on the systems. Okay, and now I believe I turn it over to Lisa.
So we will be talking about how symptoms of secondary traumatic stress can show on a professional level. It is important to recognize the symptoms of STS. When working with people who have experienced trauma, STS symptoms can mirror those of PTSD. I will be referring to child welfare workers as frontline workers, first responders. I think oftentimes, social workers are often forgotten in that group or the identity of being called frontline workers, but that's very much what you are. So frontline workers especially are vulnerable to developing secondary trauma. Some symptoms may include avoidance of clients, places, and situations. I'm going to be honest with you, when I worked in child welfare, there are many times I took very long bathroom breaks in the bathroom where that was not usually utilized or very low utilized, so I could not be found. I've had those moments. There have been, I often hear child welfare colleagues talk about just avoiding going to Walmart or restaurants or even places. Well, I mean, this is a pandemic, but before the pandemic, if clients had worked in specific restaurants, they would avoid those restaurants, or even gatherings such as basketball games or community events. And that is a sign of STS. Another symptom is challenges in learning and applying new information and skills. Now, Laura had kind of talked about earlier how, like sometimes we can be so focused on what our clients' needs are that we're not focusing on ourselves and our, like our cognitive abilities kind of lessen because we're not paying attention or addressing that as well. So it can become difficult in trying to take in new information or retaining information and learning new skills. It's often that we can miss appointments due to STS. It's common to have a lack of motivation, quick to argue. As a supervisor, I can kind of tell what the level of, where my coworkers were just in dealing with STS. Like if they are goofy and silly and happy, things are good. But if they were cranky towards each other, quick to argue, or just, not having a good attitude, or even in myself, that was a sign that, STS is occurring, the quick to argue. There is often reduced productivity when we're not feeling well ourselves or dealing with STS. It weighs down on our motivation and ability to produce work product or to get things done. It leads to a lot of work procrastination or just not being able to be in that zone of just, getting things done or working. And I had seen earlier that someone had mentioned in the chat where secondary stress or traumatic stress can lead to our decision making or impact that as well. And it can lead to quick assumptions regarding case progression. Just being in the field myself previously, I'm very well aware of when that would occur. And even just being a parent, like when your kids are saying, Mom, can we do this? No. Mom, can we do this? No. And they just constantly wear you down to the point where you're just like, fine. That can be also an issue of, when we're working professionally, is just it can impact our decision making as well. Next slide. So organizationally, secondary traumatic stress can occur as well. It does not just occur individually, it can also be very present within the organization as well. Frontline workers, first responders, and our child welfare workers are unique in that we often have like a special bond that occurs. So many of us are working in very high, with high trauma, with a lot of crisis, a lot of stress, and we're often bound by confidentiality. So we really turn to our coworkers because it takes one to know one, and we rely on each other in that we're kind of collectively going through the same thing. So we build this support system just within our organization. The secondary traumatic stress can affect that as well. It limits coworkers. We often become like a second family. When difficult situations are often shared, it can be, if it's not directly experienced, it can be experienced collectively. As individuals, we process and experience stress and secondary stress differently, but it can also impact the organization as well, because we can also, as a group, experience that collectively as well and get frustrated and feel those emotions collectively, feeling the grief and loss collectively. It is also very common to have like a high staff turnover. So a lot of times, just the dynamics within an organization is affected by having new people come in, people go out, and just having the constant influx. It takes a lot of time to build trust among colleagues, to have like safety and vulnerability with each other. And that can also lead to secondary traumatic stress. The indicators of STS on the organizational level can be, as I said, like high staff turnover, lack of institutional knowledge, low morale, decreased customer service, prevention intervention services misaligned with needs, increased financial cost, staff training, repeat maltreatment, legal action, and lateral violence.
One of the things I just wanted to highlight here with that increased financial cost, I mean, one of the things that we would look at when I was working in direct practice was just financial cost associated with onboarding a new person. And that might have been, it certainly was the cost for training, but it was also the time that went into transferring cases, the time that went into that person kind of learning the ropes before they were able to kind of be a productive contributor to the team. And then I think the reality is that when youth are left in an unsafe situation and repeat maltreatment occurs, that work with that family will continue, right? Versus when a family's identified in need, properly aligned with services that will help alleviate the safety concern, and then don't come back on the radar of child welfare programs. Sorry, Lisa, keep going.
No problem. So and just to back up a little, lateral violence is defined as non-physical, aggressive, hostile, and or harmful behavior between coworkers. The presence of lateral violence can lead to a toxic work environment, can hinder and affect services to clients, and can affect employee morale. So Laura and I have been doing like peer groups, specifically with child welfare workers. And what we are hearing a lot about is lateral violence. And I will kind of talk about it a little bit later as well. But we just want to highlight that it is occurring and to be aware, and that it is a symptom of organizational STS. Next slide. Let's take a moment to talk about what Laura and I have already covered. Please feel free to utilize the chat box in answering the questions. What are ways that your professional life is affected by stress? And what are ways your program is impacted by stress? Let's give it a few minutes here. Burnout, yes. Low morale. Isolation, compassion fatigue, stress that causes lack of motivation. It can manifest as depression, yep. It can affect how you deal with clients. Lack of socialization. Health, absolutely. demanding and borderline unrealistic expectations towards staff, services, and clients. Yes, so in child welfare, we already are a lot of times underfunded, but it also, we have high caseloads, so I understand that absolutely. Lateral violence is especially important to address in the workforce. Feelings of loss and compassion for the work reflects poor health and productivity. Yep. And then later we will also cover on strategies in helping alleviate, either preventing or alleviating not only STS, but lateral violence as well. Lack of compassion, high turnover, lack of communications because no one wants to talk to each other. No. Thank you all for these responses. I do know, am fully aware of the stresses that you face, and I hope that this is providing like a safe place for us to talk about it, or even to start to inspire to talk about it as well. So with protective factors, when working in an environment that deals on the front lines of trauma, it is very important, if not imperative, to develop protective factors with secondary traumatic stress. As a former tribal child welfare practitioner, I personally relied on my Ojibwe culture and traditions for self-care. For example, I would take time to smudge, either in my office or my boss's office, or I would actually just go outside and go take tobacco and go put it out on the tree and just, you know, say a little prayer or ask for just help or assistance to get through either just that moment or that day or that experience. Or I would even attend sweat lodges. I've even asked my husband and a close friend of ours, like when things got really tough, I would ask them to fully smudge me down and to use their ego fans to kind of, like, we call it, dust it off or clean it off. And just for me, that would just help out a lot. I took time to talk to elders and ask for guidance, and would attend ceremonies and specifically petition for help in those ceremonies in dealing with the secondary traumatic stress that I was experiencing. Our tribal cultures are embedded with healing ceremonies. And I will talk a little bit later. I have seen where some of you have, you know, like expressed, like, due to the pandemic, that it's very difficult not to have access to that. And I will talk about that in a little bit. So access to formal and informal support services is important as well. Informal support can be talking to someone you trust, whether it's a friend, relative, or even a coworker, attending ceremonies or church, or finding ways to uplift your spirit. Formal support services can be like meeting with a counselor or seeking services in that way. The most important thing is you must take care of yourself, especially when you spend so much of your life energy taking care of others. You know, they always talk about, you know, like if you're in an airplane, you're actually instructed, if anything is to occur, to, you know, put the mask on yourself before you help any others. And I think a lot of times we forget that. We just push ourselves aside, put all of our energies into helping others, that we're forgetting ourselves. And it's imperative, and it's okay, and it's healthy to take care of yourself. In tribal culture, it is often said that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, meaning we are on earth to live as human, and all the ups and downs that we go through in life, such as crisis, trauma, grief, loss, or the happy things like marriages, babies, grandbabies, like achieving successes, whatever it is, getting new jobs, that helps us grow and develop spiritually. Trauma and loss is part of this human experience. Everyone will experience trauma. It is imperative that we develop an acute understanding of our own personal trauma history and how our own personal trauma can affect others in our work. If there are particular events that may trigger your personal trauma or experiences that you're going through, it's important to be aware of that. And it's absolutely healthy and okay to voice that you need to take a step back or not take on a certain case because of paying attention to your own personal trauma. It is also important to know your temperament and coping style. I came to learn that during moments of crisis, I would be calm, steady, and reassuring. I would use a lot of humor with my coworkers or other stakeholders, or even the families we were dealing with, if it was appropriate to do so. I found that I had a way of remaining gentle yet firm. But in coping with trauma, I found that when I needed the most support, it wasn't during the actual crisis, it was hours after. After things have been settled, after things are resolved, that's when I really needed to make sure I needed to take care of myself, because the experience would just come as like a whoosh and it would hit me after the effect. And I had found that my best coping method was to kind of have my husband or other support system on close standby, just so, they can be there to help me, deal with the whoosh and the impact of what it was that had occurred earlier. Self-care is knowing yourself and identifying what needs you have in coping with secondary traumatic stress. Whether you are a worker or a supervisor, it is important to recognize and support staff. So whether it's those who you supervise or even those who you work with as coworkers. It's important that as a worker, to have safe, and even as supervisor, to have the work environment, to be able to have like the safety within a work environment where coworkers can approach each other, workers can approach their supervisors, just to have open and honest discussions about experienced secondary traumatic stress, and even recognizing that it's occurring not only in like yourself or with others, and having the trust and vulnerability to be able to share that with each other and as a team. Ways that you can find ways to provide support, whether it is taking time off for a lunch, going for a walk in the woods, either individually or with coworkers. Just asking a supervisor at times. As a supervisor, I'd often tell my workers, you guys need to go to lunch, and you need to take an extra long lunch, because I recognize that you guys kind of need some time and just to take a break from everything. It's important to kind of get to know the personalities of each other so that you can quickly ascertain as to when someone may be experience STS, and being able to be the helpful person. And instead of kind of reaching them as a coworker, I would often say that's when you have to put on like your relative aunt or hat and treat each other as a relative. So instead of being like acting as a coworker and having, like that distance, trying to create, a situation where you guys have enough closeness to where you can treat each other as like siblings or aunties or uncles, and showing that love to each other and taking care of each other as well. Next slide. So these are very impactful times we are working in. Our nations, whether it's tribal or federal or both, are greatly impacted by culture, race, and oppression. Providers of colors and providers who hold target identities may have additional vulnerabilities to STS due to exposure to the same oppression and institutional racism as those that they work with, having a lack of cultural safety or supports within their agency, colleagues minimizing or avoiding topics of racial, cultural, or historical trauma, and having higher caseloads and being asked to take additional responsibilities such as translation, being asked to speak about race and marginalized identities and to educate others about bias. So with target identities is defined as members of social identity groups who are discriminated against, marginalized, disenfranchised, oppressed, exploited by an oppressor and oppressor system. Examples can be those of the LGBTQ community, immigrants, women, even children, or those with physical disabilities. There are many more, but those are just some of the examples so we can help define what that meant. STS can be higher in individuals who have a target identity and who are automatically assigned additional cases of the same target identity. If a target identity worker tries to find support in counseling, it can be a challenge to find a counselor of the same target identity. So an example of this is if a worker is at risk of let me back up a little. So an example of this could be, say for instance, that I want to go to a counselor because I'm experiencing high levels of secondary stress, traumatic stress. I'm also, Bad River Ojibwe, so I have, I'm carrying that and seeing whatever I'm seeing in the media and, what the current status of the nation is, it's having an impact and difficult with me. But if I were to go seek a counselor, it's harder and more challenging to find a counselor where I don't have to educate them or explain to them what it is I'm experiencing, because they may not know, because they may not be of, my own target identity or within being a person of color or even a Native American woman. So there's difficulties in that, and workers have higher vulnerabilities due to that. The worker is at higher risk of STS, of having to educate their support service professional as what is being experienced and why. So it can even be if you're already experiencing compassion fatigue and you're going to counseling or therapy to kind of help alleviate that, but you're having to additionally educate, that can become an issue and a problem. So historical trauma, while always present in tribal communities, is surfacing in new ways due to the pandemic. Many of us, myself included, are the first generation of tribal people that can practice our cultural ceremonies and traditions openly. Just in my parents' generation, they were not able to, or they had to go underground or do it in, like I hear a lot of my aunties or uncles or, like those that would be in my grandparents' generation talk about how they would have to hide in order to do these. But now, due to the pandemic, we have the freedom to, however, due to, like the restrictions and just trying to reduce the spread of the virus, we're not able to have ceremonies or to come together, in groups or practice a lot of these ways. So what I'm hearing across Indian country is, it's resurfacing the historical trauma of, not having the ability to practice those ways, in the past and to now because of, restrictions in doing so. It is having a profound effect on, like emotional well-being, spiritual well-being, and it's just very difficult at this time. It also has been a prevalent issue of having safety and support in talking about race, culture, and historical trauma within a workplace, but this is currently exacerbated with the current times that we are living in right now. We just need to create safety for all workers and to be able to show our vulnerability and share the impacts we are facing. So factors to consider in tribal communities. Tribal cultures are based in community and kinship. That's our core, that's our heart, that's who we are as tribal people. It is our culture to thrive and exist as a community rather than individually. When a tragedy, crisis, or traumatic experience occurs within a tribal community, it is felt and it's absorbed as a community, not just the individuals or the small group who it's directly impacting. The feelings of loss, grief, and fear is prevalent in the community rather than just the individuals that are impacted. Workers who are also community members are more vulnerable to STS, not only because they have the role of providing the services, but they're also impacted by the community loss. They're also feeling it as well. They're part of that, like the kinship in the community. And because of that, the work becomes more personal. Tribal kinship is unique in that family and relatives are defined in more expansive ways rather than just biological nuclear families. Many tribal communities have close-knit clan systems, for example. What happens to one clan member happens to all clan members. It's not just small groups of families. It can be expansive clan networks as well. Tribal communities also have cultural ways of adopting families. We have ceremonies in which we can, expand our family and adopt each other, and it brings the community even closer and even weaves the close-knit even more closely because we are intertwining or connecting our families and our kinship in our community in those ways. This type of closeness is an absolute strength, but it's also a vulnerability for us as well, because all of our hearts are connected and we feel everything together. We are very empathetic people that's deeply embedded within our culture, and we just feel things on a community level, not just an individual level. Historical trauma is also experienced on a collective community level. It is very common in tribal communities that the majority, if not the entirety of a tribal community is impacted by trauma. And is not just, as I said, limited just to a small family. I have seen like earlier comments when Laura was talking, I follow the chat, and I have seen where some of you have mentioned that, with the the pandemic and with everyone being told to, like stay home, that domestic violence is occurring. That's also like a form of historical trauma, as we have roots of the domestic violence roots within Native communities comes from like the historical trauma involved in boarding schools. Next slide. So we have covered the first two stages of preventing and mitigating secondary traumatic stress. We covered knowledge, the defining and understanding symptomology, and recognition tools to assess impacts. Now we're going to cover the third stage, response. In this section, we talk about strategies to prevent and or to alleviate symptoms of STS.
Right. Thank you, Lisa. So we'll move through the personal, professional, and organizational ways to recognize when we're being impacted by the work. And this first one we'll start with is personal, right? How do we assess if we are experiencing some of those personal impacts that we talked about in the beginning? And our first recommendation is really just for that critical self-reflection. So finding time, finding a space, finding a place where you feel comfortable and able to ask yourselves and get introspective and really consider how this work is impacting you. So up here on the screen are some examples of questions to ask yourself about an experience, interaction, or circumstance or event that has happened, and really to start to pick apart what some of those emotional responses that you were having were. And I think that when we think about self-reflection, it's best when we can do it on a consistent kind of reliable way. And then our second recommendation is to always focus on feelings, right? So we can get a better understanding of ourselves so that we can recognize emotions in the children and the families that we're working with. And so that hopefully we can even impart and teach youth and the caregivers to be able to do the same within themselves. And you might also consider reflecting on some more general questions, right? Like, how am I doing right now? What is contributing to my stress? What's contributing to my resilience to that stress? And is there anything I want to change? And what steps do I need to take towards where I want to be? So reflect, right? And I think what is challenging about this is finding the time and being consistent with it. But when we can do it in a consistent way, and when we can get good at identifying some of our emotional reactions to different types of situations and circumstances, we're more equipped to bounce back from some of the more unsettling emotions that we have. And then, of course, there's some validated tools you can use. So we always recommend, if you're going to utilize these, and we're going to put them up as a link in the chat, and they'll also go out in an email afterwards. But do these regularly, like at certain designated intervals, like monthly or quarterly. And then we also always suggest we see them most successful when people do them in connection with others, right? So when it becomes part of you and your colleagues do it together, take them individually, but then talk about what you were surprised by within your results, what you weren't surprised to see, and anything that you might that you noticed and you might try to do differently between now and the next time that you take the questionnaire. So the first is the professional quality of life scale. It asks 30 questions for you to answer over the last 30 days. And it breaks down your results. It asks a series of questions you answer from 1 to 5, and it breaks down a person's experience of STS, their experience of burnout, and their experience of compassion satisfaction. And that is really, that says fatigue, but compassion satisfaction as well as compassion fatigue. It will let you know. And though that's really the inspiration, the hope, the motivation, the kind of increased productivity that can come from having successes and getting something from this work that you do. But I did want to highlight that you can have high levels of compassion satisfaction as well as STS, so they can coexist. And secondary traumatic stress scale is a slightly shorter questionnaire, and it looks at the last 7 days. And when it spits out the results of as far as kind of how you're operating, it will do so in a way that calculates your experience of intrusive thoughts, your avoidance experience, and your arousal. And I hope those sound familiar because they are some of the hallmark signs of post-traumatic stress disorder, that fight, flight, or freeze. And then there are approaches that support assessing the impact of STS symptoms on your professional selves as well. Most of us can really appreciate the value of our coworkers in our life, right? The family is so important, but our coworkers are there with us day in and day out and can really understand some of the pervasiveness and challenges that exist in the work. So we encourage people to connect with others and discuss the challenges, but do so in a way that's productive to skill development and problem solving and critical thinking. There's some key considerations up here for debriefing that's constructive so that it doesn't become an act of lateral violence, so it doesn't become gossip or like that water cooler talk, and that it doesn't become a one-upping type of conversation. This is just what I experienced. You wouldn't believe, and then someone jumping in and saying, you wouldn't believe, you think that's bad, you wouldn't believe what happened to me yesterday. So we always suggest having those conversations in private, right? Honoring confidentiality, being aware of what you're looking to get from the conversation, letting your coworker know that you want to talk to them about a case, about a conflict, and getting their consent, and not sliming onto them the graphic details that might contribute to, that might be another exposure opportunity for them to STS. So we want to limit the details needed to be able to seek the support, advice, and guidance that we're looking for. Another professional strategy is the use of reflective supervision or reflective peer support. And the focus of this supervision is to build on the professional's use of their thoughts, feelings, and values within a service encounter, with an interaction with a client. The case and discussion are selected by the person receiving the supervision or support, and it brings awareness around the influence of that worker's values, thoughts, feelings that contribute to those interactions and case progression. So that connection between the supervisor and supervisee often parallels that desired relationship between the caseworker and the caregiver, and that helping helper kind of component. And then as well, the caregiver to the child. So there's a focus on collaboration, creating choice when possible, building trust, and offering control when we're able. And it's important for, obviously, for this practice to happen in safe environments where people feel like they're able to share, like they're able to discuss their feelings, and like they're going to receive some support and guidance. The model was developed from the perspective of supervisor to supervisee, though we have seen communities have some success with this style of supervision when it's done with the same intent in peer groups amongst colleagues, right? When that supervisory structure doesn't quite exist in that way and make it feasible. There are organizational ways to assess whether the service delivery is impacted by secondary traumatic stress. This is one of the organizational assessments we like to talk about, and it really evaluates the degree to which a program or organization responds to the impact of STS on the staff within the program, and ultimately what that looks like amongst the workforce. So it's a survey that's meant to be taken by all staff at all levels, and the results will shed light provide some themes of where a program is seeing success and where there are some challenges to their approach to secondary traumatic stress. So a program might see that they're lacking in having specific policy around what to do when what a staff can do when they're struggling with the symptoms of secondary traumatic stress. You might find that the organization is lacking in how they onboard new hires in a way that does not prepare them for the work ahead and what they might see and hear. And they might also find that one of the success areas is that staff in general feel supported and that their supervisors do care about their well-being. So it provides some thematic areas that are going well and some challenges when it comes to secondary traumatic stress.
So I kind of jumped ahead a little earlier because the other slide looked just like this one. So this is a third section regarding response. I'm sorry about that. Next slide. So what are some personal self-care strategies? I realize that we are kind of running out of time, so I'm just going to focus on some of the ones that you may not be as familiar with, such as intellectual self-care. Intellectual self-care addresses like your inner thinker, or what I like to say, your nerdiness, to expand your knowledge and mindset. It's being responsible kind of for your own personal growth. It is the pursuit of learning and education. It could be anything from reading a book to learning a new skill or hobby, or listening to a podcast, watching a documentary. Is just whatever gets your brain motivated and working in within your nerd passions. Financial self-care is, I tend to do a lot of retail therapy when I'm experiencing a lot of STS, and I have to become more aware not to get onto Amazon when I'm experiencing that. It's having and setting financial goals and trying to keep consistent with those goals. Next slide. As I mentioned before, coworkers can become like your second family. What are some professional self-care strategies that can be done? You can speak to your supervisor or a coworker that you trust if you are noticing STS symptoms within yourself or others. Talking about these vulnerabilities is a strength. I want to absolutely mention that. It takes courage and honesty to admit when you are experiencing STS or have those issues or concerns. You can possibly take advantage if your employee assistance program. I know of programs that can offer counseling even during work times, or if it becomes like a substance abuse issue, there's counseling for that as well. Just reaching out and getting those benefits and that help. In social work and social services, we are trained to find the strength perspective, right? We're always told to do that. It is identifying the strengths, the pockets of hopes, the finding of the good that is important to do for yourself too. Even in dealing with horrible situations, we are receiving the opportunities to grow and learn. Trying to have that mindset instead of, oh my, like the world is ending, this is horrible. Try to take a breath and find the ways like, okay, what is it that I can take from this? What is it trying to teach me? How can I get to the goal of, getting on the other side of this? But what are the steps that I have to go through in personal growth to be able to go there, and taking the baby steps of just problem solving and working through the issues. Find ways to identify the strengths within yourself and hang on to them. Those are going to be like the ships that take you through the storm. They become kind of like your lifelines and your self-care strategies. Interrupt your negative thinking patterns and find ways to turn them into positives. Next slide. So to work protectively is to aid in the management of STS practice. You can engage empathetically with boundaries, stay open-minded, document each day, do something different between meetings with children and families, and attend to your reactions. As I said before, it's important to take care of yourself, and it's absolutely okay to establish boundaries and providing for your own self-care. It's okay to be able to take time for yourself. For instance, if you are working and you normally have your door open all day so that your other coworkers or even your supervisor can come in and out, or if your supervisor and your workers can come in and out, it's absolutely okay to, if you need to, take the time to close that door and just take the 10 to 15 minutes of you time that you need. That's healthy, and that's using your strengths. You can take time to maybe in between meetings with different children and families to go on just short walks. Just go outside for 5 or 10 minutes just to breathe in fresh air. Just take some time for yourself. In the pandemic, if you're in between Zoom meetings, even just taking time to go sit on your porch or in your backyard with a cup of coffee in between. Those are ways that we can take ourselves in these times of virtual interactions as well. Next slide. So organizational strategies. I had spoken about lateral violence earlier. And just to refresh, lateral violence is defined as a non-physical, aggressive, hostile, and harmful behavior between coworkers. If you recognize lateral violence, it is important to identify and to name it. Most organizations have policies of how to handle conflict within a workplace. And as workers or supervisors, lateral violence can be prevented and are addressed by creating an environment of safety. Do you have a safe forum to problem solve issues that arise? Are you able to speak freely? If not, what are ways to address that and to make it a safe place? How can you incorporate the culture and ceremony? In tribal communities, this can involving smudging while talking, or even having like a pipe ceremony within the workspace. I've seen that occur as well. So Laura, just quick, I know that we're kind of at the mark. Do we keep going, or what do you suggest? Laura Dyer. There's 2 Lauras.
For the recording, if you want, I know you have, I think, 2 slides left, so we can capture the information you wanted to share in the recording. And for all who do have to jump off right at the half-hour mark here, we are going to send an email that has information about when and how to access the recording, a copy of the slides from today's presentation, links to a number of the resources shared, and more resources available from our center on trauma and resiliency. And I will also include information about how to request a certificate of attendance and a brief survey, which I also linked in the chat. If you could take a few minutes to fill that out, it will really help us improve future webinars. And so for those who are able to stay on, I think we have about 5 minutes left. Excellent. Thanks, Lisa and Laura.
Yeah. So vicarious resilience involves the process of learning about overcoming adversity from the trauma survivor and the resulting transformation and empowerment through their empathy and interaction. What does this mean? So the way that I understand this, and Laura, Guay, you can jump in anytime. The way that I understand this is having the space and gratitude to celebrate the resilience and successes of the clients you work with. As workers, you can experience vicarious trauma, but as workers, you also have the gift of experiencing the vicarious resilience. So when you have clients who have success stories, who make changes, and who are doing things in a good way, you get to take that on and experience that as yourself. This can also help with alleviating STS. These are the moments that we live for, right? I used to have in my office just like a small thank you card written by a child that whenever I had hard days, I would focus on that because that was my vicarious resilience. Because knowing of the changes that the child went through and how the child was thriving and just doing wonderful, that always gave me what I needed. So some questions you can ask about to yourself is, how do you benefit from the trauma work that you do with your clients? Reflect on that. I think that will help you understand where you can find the pockets of vicarious resilience. And explore your own ways of overcoming adversities and consider the lessons you have learned from those experiences. Next slide. So the impact of vicarious resilience is having a greater perspective and appreciation. It's increased optimism, motivation, and energy. It's increased hope, understanding, and belief in what is possible. And it's having a profound sense of commitment and meaning making from the work. Laura?
All right, so this is where we wrap. So we really appreciate you all taking the time today to, I would say, begin this conversation and dialogue around secondary trauma and what we can do individually, what we can do professionally, and what organizations can do to help combat some of the symptoms that ultimately impact our well-being and the well-being of the youth and families that we provide services to. So there is a lot more information on trauma-informed strategies on the Tribal Information Exchange. We've got a resource list out there. And then if you have interest in peer groups, getting together with one another to talk a little bit more about some of the strategies you're using or want to know information, connect with us as well. And you can reach us by this phone number. We also have an email address, and there's a contact form on our website. So thank you. Thank you for the work that you do for the kids, for the families and communities you all are a part of. It's a privilege to get to be in this space with you, and I just want to say thank you. So with that, I would say stay safe and carry on. Unless Laura, you had any final sign-offs you wanted to do, or Jackie?
To thank you both so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise today, and just a huge thank you to everyone who shared their time with us.
Yeah, miigwech, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Till next time.